My name is Maxie Corbin. I'm a member of the Department of Customer Love at Looker. If you have ever used the chat tool in the application, you may or may not have talked to me. And I'm going to be talking today about creating seamless workflows with Zapier, focusing mostly on how to automate a couple of really common tasks that people want to be able to perform with the data that they have locked up in Looker. All right, let's get started. So most people today are using Looker as an analytics tool. And Looker on its own can get data to the right people at the right time pretty well. But those people eventually have to act on the data that they receive in order for that data to have value. So for example, if you create a dashboard or a look or something, and you're emailing it to a C-level executive, once it gets to that person, your job is done. You can't do anything else after that. And it's their job to actually act on the data, or else everything that came before that doesn't have any value. So what we're going to talk about today is using Looker as a data platform. So if we integrate Looker with our other services, then we can automatically act on new data as soon as it's available. So there's no more shuffling data around either by emails or by copying and pasting into Slack. That's kind of robot work. That's not really the meaningful work that we like to do. So I'm going to talk about how you can get that kind of work out and automated. We'll talk about acting on data from Looker at a high level right now, just kind of like including everything that people are doing right now. The first thing that you have to do is you have to move the data out of Looker. Most people are doing this manually right now, and unfortunately this has a high recurring cost, both in terms of time and in terms of what people have to do. And it makes humans sad, just because it's kind of rote, mechanical work, and it doesn't actually involve like any meaningful analysis. The only benefit really is that there's a low upfront cost because you're not having to build anything, you're not having to do any work to get it there. A sort of middle step is to build a microservice that automates moving that data from one place to another. This has got a pretty high upfront cost because you're going to be writing like an application in Ruby or Python or something that catches the data as it comes out of Looker and then shuffles it over to your other services. But it's got a really low recurring cost because it happens automatically. Or we can use a tool that is especially built for this, and this sort of gets at both points. This is a low upfront cost because we're not building anything. We're just using someone else's code. And it's got a low recurring cost because, again, it's automated. Automation is rad because you're reducing the friction between your exploration of the data and the action that happens. So the basic tasks to automate this is to extract the data from where it lives, structure it because it's very rarely going to come out of Looker in the structure that some target service needs it in, and then you send the data to the service so that it can take the appropriate action. So step one is going to be using data actions or scheduled webhooks. Now data actions are initiated by an end user during their analysis. They're done from Looker. They're really easy to define, and I'll show you how to do that later on during this talk. It's usually used right now to send individual rows, but eventually I think we're planning on allowing you to send multiple rows with data actions. Scheduled webhooks are sort of like scheduled emails, but rather than going to an email address, they're going to be sent at a URL as a HTTP post request for folks who are familiar. They're scheduled in advance, and they can be recurring or they can be one-offs. So this is a great way to get batch jobs done without any kind of manual intervention. And steps 2 and 3, this would be something you could write a service for, or what I'll be talking about today is how to take action on these steps with tools like Zapier. Now, Zapier is a platform for linking web applications together and automating how they interact. Raise your hand if you use Zapier right now in your work. Awesome, cool. So a couple of folks are already familiar with how this works. That means you can take this and immediately apply it to your day-to-day. For those of you who don't use Zapier right now, Zapier basically is working as a translator or a go-between between Looker and other services in these examples. And I can take questions afterwards if you have more questions about how it works. So first example is using data actions. And I'm going to show you how to use Looker to announce or flag important things. And my specific example is I'm going to just show you how to like immediately post something to a Slack channel. For us, this is important like for folks internal to the Looker team because we can like enable support analysts and managers to, if they find anything like in the course of their analysis, they can just flag it without taking them out of their analytics workflow. So as an example, I'll post a quick notification to a Slack channel using a data action. The first step is to just write the data action. This happens in LookML. and it just gets put right into the dimension or the measure definition. This action parameter takes a label, the URL, and then as many parameters as you want to send. And then you just use liquid to define what kind of data you want to show up in that parameter. So this gives you a lot of freedom to decide what kinds of data and in what structure you want it to show up in. And then, of course, this is blurred out because you shouldn't share the URLs that you're sending your data to. And I'm not going to share this one. Step 2, you create the Zap, which is Zapier's name for like an individual task. And so you'll select this catch hook. This is where I'm getting this URL that I'm providing in the data action in the previous step. And then I'm just defining what I'm going to do with it down here. During this setup process, you'll just fire off a quick data action so that Zapier has some test data to work with, and that's really easy to do. OK, so I'm going to show you how to do this, but due to the sensitivity of the data, I'm not actually going to be using any real data. I'm just going to use some surf log data instead. OK, so here's a dimension called notes that I have. I want to send along the notes data right here, along with a couple of extra parameters. And that includes the date of the surf session, where the break was, what board was used, and how long I spent in the water. And then this is my Zapier URL, which is going to tell it where to send the data. And then this is just going to tell me how it shows up in the front end. So when I go to actually do this, it is super straightforward. I'm just going to, either in an explore or in a look, this little ellipsis shows up next to the data in the notes dimension. And I'm going to click Announce in Slack. And there it is. So RoboCop is letting me know that someone went surfing. And that was yesterday at 4 Mile in Santa Cruz. They used a 60S2 board. They spent 50 minutes in water. And I guess there were some short sets, and it was kind of mixed up. So that posted immediately because Looker sent the webhook over to Zapier. Zapier received that information and structured it in the way that Slack was expecting, and they just sent it over to Slack for the API to process. The benefits of doing it this way is that we can instantly bring an insight that someone discovers during their analysis to Slack or any other service as soon as the person notices it. You don't have to copy things or paste screenshots into Slack. You can just get things immediately in. And you can start conversations by posting into direct messages or also using like an @here in a channel, which is what I did there. You can do the same thing for any other service that you currently use in your day-to-day. So example 2, I'm going to automatically create new Zendesk tickets from data in Looker. This is something that we are actually using right now on the support team because we want to make sure that we're tracking issues in Zendesk as well. So we actually get data out of GitHub and get it into Zendesk as an individual ticket. Creating a matching Zendesk ticket kind of sucks, and it was what we were doing before, and we were actually outsourcing that to other teams. So they asked us to build something to automate it. We had some extra conditions in place, which is why we ended up using Looker instead of GitHub as our data source. We didn't want to create tickets where the engineers were creating these issues, because then we'd get things like pull requests in our Zendesk data, which isn't super useful. We wanted to make sure that we didn't already have a Zendesk ticket linked, because then we'd be reproducing information. And Looker was really the only place that we had the information we needed to filter out those cases. So the first step was to create the look that contained the information I wanted. The second step was to write a scheduled webhook. This was just going to, you just select destination as webhook and provide the URL. I left the URL out here, obviously, because we're using this right now. And then I scheduled it every day for 6 a.m. To do the previous day's information. The next step was to create a Zap, which caught the hook and created a Zendesk ticket. Again, due to the sensitivity of the data, this is customer data, so I'm going to be using the surf log data instead. So from this same look that I just fired off the data action from, I can go to Schedule, put in my URL here, change this to webhook, and of course, we're going to have to send a quick test just to make sure that we can actually work with the information. And this was actually a little bit tricky, and I can post this code later on today for people who are interested in implementing this pattern later. But scheduled webhooks give you multiple entities per scheduled webhook, and Zapier kind of runs on like a one-off basis. So I actually had to write 2 Zaps for this. The first one caught the webhook and then used some really simple JavaScript to split out the actual rows that I was interested in. It's sending as a tab delimited file, so super easy. Just split by new line and then split by tab. And then I actually fire off some post requests here in my JavaScript to a different Zapier URL, which is up here. And then the second Zap catches this webhook. You can actually like examine the data while you're making this. So this is the individual row level data that I've actually sent over to the new Zap. And then I'm just going to create a Zendesk ticket from that. I'm going to assign it to myself. And you can provide any other information for the ticket in here as well. So you can set status based on certain data. You can set an assignee. And so I'm just going to give some basic information about the surf session. And so if I go and test this, and I go check in Zendesk, there it is, surf report for the 4th of September with the relevant information in it. And so these happen super fast. Normally with Zapier, you have to wait about 5 minutes before it can react to something that's new. But since we're using webhooks, it happens instantaneously. Oops. OK. So obviously, we're using GitHub data in here instead of surf log information. So the benefits for us is just improved follow-up time on bugs that are encountered by non-support staff, and a more reliable relationship between Zendesk tickets and GitHub issues in our data, which makes all of our analysis like way more reliable. In general, the ability to take any kind of action on many things at once on this kind of recurring basis is extremely useful because you don't have to actually have anyone pressing the button on the other end. Things get sent out, and then you can act on it as soon as the data arrives. Zapier is really cool because they have a ton of integrations. So I think they have over 750 at this point. And so this is just me scrolling through their list. You can search and just combine these services in any possible combination. There's a ton of examples, but I try to list a couple here as ideas in case you use any of these services. You can use certain things as triggers and then take actions. And so the possibilities are really limitless.